Sarah's marriage to David had always seemed like the kind of relationship many people dreamed of having. They had met in college, fallen in love quickly, and married in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by friends and family. For years, their life appeared picture-perfect. They bought a nice house in a quiet neighborhood, held steady jobs, and maintained the kind of routine that gave the impression of stability and contentment. But beneath the surface of that perfect picture, things were far from ideal. David was a good provider, but he was distant and preoccupied. His long work hours meant he was often tired and emotionally unavailable. The conversations between them became fewer and colder. Sarah often found herself eating dinner alone while David stayed late at the office or focused on his phone. Weekends that were once filled with laughter and outings were now marked by silence and separate activities. Sarah felt as if she were living with a stranger, a man who shared her home but not her heart. The loneliness Sarah experienced was crushing. She was not the kind of person to complain or seek sympathy openly. Instead, she buried her feelings deep inside, hoping things would change. But as months turned into years, the gap between them only grew wider. Friends and family noticed the change too, but whenever anyone asked, Sarah assured them everything was fine. She didn't want to admit the truth, that she felt invisible, unimportant, and desperate for some kind of connection. In the quiet moments when no one else was around, Sarah would turn to her phone and browse the internet, searching for something to fill the void. Social media felt hollow and shallow, with people posting only their happy moments. That was not what she needed. One night, while scrolling aimlessly, she stumbled upon a website offering pen pal programs for inmates. It promised a chance to correspond with people behind bars, to offer them friendship and support. Something about the idea intrigued her. It seemed different, real, raw, and maybe even dangerous. At first, Sarah hesitated. She was a married woman, after all. Why would she want to get involved with a stranger who was in prison? But curiosity won over caution. She signed up and created a simple profile, carefully omitting details that could identify her. Soon, messages started arriving. Most were polite and brief, but one stood out. The sender was a man named Jason. His message was thoughtful and personal, revealing parts of his life story, a difficult childhood, mistakes made, and the harsh realities of prison life. Jason's words struck a chord with Sarah. Unlike the polite but empty messages from others, Jason's letters had a raw honesty she hadn't seen in years. He talked about regret and loneliness in a way that mirrored her own feelings. Without realizing it, Sarah began to look forward to his letters. She found herself reading and rereading them late into the night, feeling a strange connection to someone she had never met. As weeks passed, Sarah's correspondence with Jason became a secret ritual. She wrote back carefully, choosing her words, to encourage and comfort him. Jason replied with gratitude and shared more about himself, including his hopes of turning his life around. To Sarah, he seemed vulnerable and sincere, a man who had made mistakes, but wanted redemption. She convinced herself that she was helping him, providing a lifeline to someone lost in the darkness. But the relationship grew deeper than Sarah intended. The messages became more frequent and personal. Jason's tone shifted from remorseful to affectionate. He complimented Sarah, praised her kindness, and expressed feelings that went beyond friendship. Sarah felt a thrill she hadn't experienced in years. Her loneliness began to fade, replaced by excitement and anticipation for each new message. She felt alive again. Despite the growing bond, Sarah kept the affair hidden. She didn't tell David, not even a hint. The thought of admitting to her husband that she was exchanging intimate letters with a prisoner terrified her. She feared his anger and judgment, but also the collapse of the life they had built together. So she lied about the time she spent on her phone and deleted messages after reading them. Her secret weighed heavily on her conscience, but the emotional escape was too strong to resist. Outside the house, life continued as usual. Sarah played the role of the dutiful wife, attending social events and smiling through conversations. Yet the divide inside her widened. She was no longer just lonely. She was isolated by the secret she carried. Each day she balanced two worlds, the one everyone could see and the hidden life she shared with Jason through digital letters. Then, strange things began to happen. At first, they were small and easily dismissed. Sarah noticed odd phone calls with silence on the other end. Unmarked letters arrived in her mailbox, containing nothing but cryptic words or disturbing drawings. At times, she felt the eerie sensation of being watched, as if someone was following her or waiting outside her home. She told herself it was paranoia, a side effect of her guilt and fear. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. One night, after another message from Jason arrived, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was short, but chilling. "Stop now, or you'll regret it." Fear tightened, its grip around her. Who was watching her? How did they know about Jason? Could this be connected to the man she had never met, but let into her heart? Despite the warning, Sarah couldn't bring herself to end the correspondence. The need for connection, for someone to care, was too powerful. She rationalized that Jason would protect her, that their bond was stronger than any threat. But the reality was far more dangerous. The man she thought she was helping was pulling her into a web of deceit and risk that neither of them could fully control. The lonely wife had stepped into a shadowy world, where secrets were currency and trust could mean death. What started as a desperate search for companionship was quickly turning into a nightmare. Sarah's quiet life was about to shatter in ways she could never imagine. The story of her online affair was only beginning, and the consequences would be devastating. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah's secret correspondence with Jason deepened, growing into something far more intense than she had ever anticipated. What began as simple letters between a lonely wife and a man behind bars soon evolved into a private world where Sarah found herself emotionally entwined with a stranger she had never met in person. Each message felt like a lifeline, a thread pulling her away from the emptiness that had settled over her marriage and her life. Jason was no longer just an inmate writing to pass the time. He became the center of Sarah's hidden thoughts. He shared stories from inside the prison walls, the harsh routines, the fights, the rare moments of hope. He spoke about the people he had hurt and the heavy weight of regret that followed him daily. His words painted a picture of a man broken, but yearning for change, a man who clung to the hope of redemption. Sarah believed him. She felt that through their exchanges, she was part of that hope, a positive force in someone's troubled life. The relationship between them grew increasingly personal. Jason asked questions about Sarah's life, her dreams, and her disappointments. Sarah found herself revealing parts of herself she hadn't shared with David or anyone else. She wrote about her loneliness, her frustration with her marriage, and her longing for something more. Each letter from Jason was filled with empathy and encouragement, offering comfort when she needed it most. The emotional intensity was overwhelming. Sarah realized she was falling in love with a man she had never met. A man confined by prison walls but free to enter her heart through words. She was aware of the risks, but convinced herself that what they shared was special, unique, and worth protecting. She imagined a future where Jason could be free, where they might finally meet without barriers. It was a dangerous fantasy, but one that kept her awake at night and hopeful during the day. Despite the passion growing between them, Sarah continued to hide the relationship from David. She became skilled at keeping her secret life separate from her public one. Messages were deleted quickly after reading, and phone calls were avoided. David never suspected a thing. Busy with his own work, and unaware of the emotional storm brewing inside his wife. Sarah's guilt gnawed at her, but the fear of losing everything kept her silent. Outside their home, however, the situation was beginning to unravel. Sarah noticed strange things that unsettled her deeply. She would find small, odd clues. An envelope slipped under the door with no return address, a phone call where no one spoke, and shadows moving near her window late at night. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, chilling her to the bone. She wondered if someone had discovered her secret, or if Jason was somehow involved. The line between fear and paranoia blurred. At times, the messages from Jason hinted at more than just affection. He spoke cryptically about a plan, a way out, a future that involved Sarah. The words were vague but carried a weight that made Sarah's heart race. She wasn't sure what to believe. Was Jason sincere or playing a dangerous game? Was he manipulating her? The uncertainty was terrifying, but Sarah was too emotionally entangled to pull away. Her life became a careful balancing act. She wanted to stop, to end the correspondence and reclaim her peace. But every time she tried, Jason's messages tugged her back in. He expressed frustration, desperation, even threats. Not physical ones, but threats to expose their affair and destroy the life she had built if she abandoned him. Sarah felt trapped. The emotional grip Jason had on her was stronger than she could resist. The emotional affair started to affect Sarah's behavior in subtle ways. She became distracted. At work, anxious around friends, and more withdrawn at home. David noticed the change, but assumed it was stress or fatigue. He tried to reach out, but Sarah's walls were up. She couldn't share the truth, and the distance between them grew even wider. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt suffocating and unsafe. Meanwhile, the mysterious warnings intensified. One afternoon, Sarah returned home to find the front door slightly ajar. Nothing was stolen, but the sense of violation shook her deeply. She reported it to the police, but with no signs of forced entry or clear evidence, the case went cold. Sarah was left with a gnawing fear that someone was targeting her, someone who knew about her secret life. One night a letter arrived that chilled Sarah to her core. It was written in messy, aggressive handwriting and contained only 3 words: stop or else. The message was unsigned, but its meaning was clear. Someone wanted her to end the relationship with Jason or face serious consequences. Panic spread through Sarah. Was this a threat from Jason's enemies, from someone in her own circle? Or was it a warning from Jason himself, testing her loyalty? The tension became unbearable. Sarah's days were marked by fear, uncertainty, and a desperate need for answers. She tried reaching out to Jason to clarify the threats, but his responses were evasive, sometimes cold. The man she thought she knew seemed to be slipping away, replaced by someone darker and more dangerous. Her heart ached with confusion and dread. Despite the growing danger, Sarah's emotional need for Jason remained strong. She couldn't abandon the connection that had become her only source of comfort. It was a paradox. The very thing saving her from loneliness was also pulling her deeper into a dangerous world. She clung to the hope that Jason was still the man she had come to care for, even as the shadows around her grew longer. Sarah's isolation grew as she stopped confiding in friends and family. She feared their judgment and didn't want to risk anyone discovering the affair. Alone with her fears and secrets, Sarah felt like she was living on the edge of a nightmare. The life she once knew was slipping away, replaced by a dangerous, hidden existence filled with lies and threats. The relationship with Jason was no longer just a secret. It was a trap. The emotional chains were tightening, and Sarah's world was closing in. Every message, every encounter brought her closer to a point of no return. The quiet woman who had once sought only connection was now caught in a dark web of manipulation, fear, and danger she couldn't escape. What started as an innocent search for companionship had become a nightmare that would change Sarah's life forever. The secrets she kept and the choices she made would lead to consequences no one could have predicted. The story of Sarah and Jason was far from over, and the next chapter would reveal just how deep the darkness ran. The day Sarah finally decided to visit Jason at the prison was one she had thought about for months but never truly believed would come. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear, excitement, and uncertainty. She knew the risks, but felt trapped by the emotional pull Jason held over her. This visit was meant to be a turning point, either a way to bring closure or a step deeper into a dangerous world. What she didn't realize was that it would change everything. The prison was cold and unwelcoming, a stark contrast to the warmth Sarah longed for in her life. Security checks were strict, and the atmosphere was tense. When she finally saw Jason, even from behind the thick glass, the reality of the situation hit her hard. He was no longer just a voice in her letters, but a real man with a hardened gaze and an air of control. His calm demeanor masked something darker beneath the surface. Their meeting was brief and controlled by the prison staff, but it was charged with intense emotion. Jason spoke carefully, hinting at things he could not fully explain. He talked about plans for freedom, opportunities for release, and a future that somehow involved Sarah. The words were vague, but the implications were clear. He was asking her to trust him, to be part of something bigger, something risky. Sarah left the prison feeling a mixture of hope and dread. Jason's promises sounded too good to be true. She wondered if he had allies on the outside or if there was some loophole in the system that could set him free early. The idea that she could help him escape the prison walls was both terrifying and intoxicating. It made her feel powerful in a way she hadn't felt in years, but also deeply vulnerable as a... Days passed, Sarah's anxiety grew. Jason's messages became more urgent, more demanding. He expected her to take risks on his behalf. At first, she hesitated, scared of what might happen if she got caught. But Jason was relentless. He insisted that she was the only one he trusted, the only one who could help him. His words were persuasive and manipulative, designed to make her feel special, but also responsible for his fate. Sarah found herself caught in a web of lies. She began sneaking out to meet people Jason named, individuals who supposedly had connections that could help with his release. She lied to David about where she was going and what she was doing. Every step she took felt like walking on thin ice, one wrong move away from disaster. Her fear was growing, but so was her sense of commitment to Jason's plan. Meanwhile, strange things around her home intensified. Unexplained noises at night, missing items, and more threatening notes left Sarah in a constant state of unease. She wondered if Jason's enemies were watching her, or if someone close to her had discovered her secret. The paranoia was overwhelming. She wanted to tell David, to ask for help, but the fear of losing him and the shame of her affair kept her silent. One evening, the tension reached a breaking point. Sarah came home to find the house ransacked, drawers pulled out, belongings scattered everywhere. Nothing valuable was taken, but the message was clear. Someone wanted to intimidate her. She called the police, but once again, there was little they could do without evidence. The fear that Jason's dangerous world was creeping into her own was no longer something she could ignore. Despite all this, Sarah still held on to Jason's promise of freedom. He sent her letters filled with cryptic instructions, urging her to stay strong and keep faith. He described a plan involving trusted contacts who would arrange his escape and ensure they could be together. The fantasy of a new life, free from loneliness and fear, blinded Sarah to the risks and reality of what she was doing. But Jason was not the man Sarah thought he was. Behind his words lay a calculating mind, one that saw Sarah not as a partner, but as a pawn. He was using her vulnerability to manipulate her into breaking the law and risking everything for him. The plan for his release was not just dangerous, it was illegal and violent. Sarah's involvement put her in grave danger, both from law enforcement and from the criminals Jason was working with. One night, Jason's messages took a darker turn. He warned Sarah that if she betrayed him or tried to back out, there would be severe consequences. The threats were thinly veiled, hinting at harm to her and those she loved. Sarah was terrified but felt powerless to escape. She was ensnared in a dangerous game where every move could lead to disaster. Her marriage was crumbling. David was growing more suspicious and distant, sensing that something was wrong but unable to reach Sarah. She was emotionally exhausted, isolated, and overwhelmed by guilt and fear. The secret affair had turned into a nightmare, with no clear way out. Sarah was caught between two worlds, one where she once hoped for love and redemption, and another where danger lurked at every corner. The situation escalated further when Sarah realized Jason had been communicating with people outside prison who were actively planning his escape. She became an unwilling accomplice, passing messages and coordinating meetings. Her actions crossed legal boundaries, and the risk of arrest loomed over her like a dark cloud. But the fear of Jason's threats kept her silent and compliant. 1 day, a friend noticed Sarah's distress and pressed her for answers. The truth poured out in a torrent of fear and desperation. Sarah revealed the online affair and the plan for Jason's escape. The friend urged her to go to the police, but Sarah was too afraid of the consequences. The web of lies, threats, and emotional manipulation had trapped her. As the days passed, Sarah's world closed in tighter. She was living in constant fear of Jason's influence, the police investigation, and the unknown enemies lurking nearby. The man she thought was her salvation had become her worst nightmare. The fantasy of freedom was slipping away, replaced by the harsh reality of danger, betrayal, and fear. The final blow came unexpectedly. Jason's escape plan was set into motion. The news broke that an inmate had escaped from the prison, a man matching Jason's description. Panic swept through Sarah's life. She was terrified for what Jason might do now that he was free. The nightmare she had helped create was no longer confined to letters and fantasies. It was real, dangerous, and unstoppable. Sarah's decision to visit Jason had opened a door she could never close. The man she met behind prison glass was no longer just a figure of hope, but a threat to her life and everything she held dear. The plan for his early release had spiraled into a deadly game of manipulation, fear, and crime. Her world was unraveling, and the next chapter would bring the darkest twist of all. The news of Jason's prison escape spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the small community where Sarah lived. Police were on high alert, and the media frenzy added pressure to an already volatile situation. Sarah's heart pounded with dread. The man she had secretly loved and helped was now a fugitive, and with every passing hour, the danger grew closer and more real. Sarah knew the police would soon begin investigating everyone connected to Jason, including herself. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure if she would fall or somehow find a way to survive. Her once quiet life was shattered. Neighbors who had been friendly before now looked at her with suspicion. The whispers started, the phone calls stopped, and the isolation deepened. Jason was nowhere to be found, but Sarah could feel his presence haunting her every moment. The messages stopped, but the threats lingered in her mind. She was trapped, in a prison of fear she could not escape from. Every creak in the house, every shadow outside her window, made her jump. The paranoia that had been growing since the letters began now consumed her. David, her husband, was bewildered and angry. He noticed her growing fear and distance, but didn't know the cause. When he finally confronted her, Sarah broke down and confessed the entire truth, the affair, the letters, the escape plan. The confession was a devastating blow to David, shattering the trust they had left. Their marriage, already fragile, seemed beyond repair. The police quickly made Sarah a person of interest. They wanted to know how involved she had been in Jason's escape, and if she was still in contact with him. Sarah was terrified of being arrested, but also desperate for protection. She agreed to cooperate, providing every detail she could remember. The investigation unfolded like a dark puzzle, piece by piece revealing the extent of Jason's manipulations. Sarah's cooperation made her a target. She received anonymous threats, warning her to stay silent or face deadly consequences. Someone wanted to keep the truth buried, and Sarah feared for her life. The emotional toll was immense. She was caught between the law, her past with Jason, and the unknown enemies hunting her. Meanwhile, law enforcement launched a manhunt for Jason. Officers combed through forests, abandoned buildings, and rural roads. His face was on every news broadcast. The man who had seemed so distant and controlled behind prison walls was now dangerous and unpredictable on the run. The community lived in fear, unsure when or where Jason might strike next. Amidst the chaos, Sarah struggled to rebuild what remained of her life. She sought counseling to deal with the trauma and guilt. The affair that had once seemed like a refuge had become a nightmare etched in her memory. She wrestled with questions about how she had fallen so far and how she could protect herself and her family from the fallout. The pressure on Sarah increased when a neighbor reported suspicious activity near her home. Police arrived to investigate, finding signs that someone had tried to break in. The threats were no longer just words. They were escalating into real danger. Sarah was forced to take security measures, changing locks, installing cameras, and even moving temporarily to a safe house. As the manhunt continued, Sarah learned something chilling. Jason had been planning more than just escape. The evidence uncovered by police revealed that he had connections with a violent group willing to do whatever it took to help him evade capture. Their plans included retaliation against anyone who might betray him, including Sarah. This revelation pushed Sarah into a deeper state of fear. She realized that Jason's threats were not empty. He had orchestrated a network that extended beyond the prison walls, and she was caught in the middle of it. Every person she trusted could potentially be a threat. The paranoia that had haunted her became a constant shadow, following her everywhere. One night, Sarah received a package left anonymously at her door. Inside was a chilling message. A photo of her family's home, taken from a distance, with a note that said, "You can't hide." The message was clear. Her past with Jason had caught up with her, and there was no safe place left. The realization that her loved ones were in danger shattered what little peace she had left. Sarah reached out to David, pleading for help to protect their family. Though their relationship was strained, David agreed to stand by her. Together they worked with law enforcement to increase security and prepare for the worst. The sense of unity gave Sarah a small measure of strength in a world turned upside down. The manhunt for Jason reached a dramatic turning point when authorities received a tip about his possible location. Police swarmed the area, setting up roadblocks and checkpoints. The tension in the community was palpable. Everyone waited, holding their breath, unsure if this would be the end or if the nightmare would only grow darker. During the search, a shocking discovery was made. Jason had left behind evidence of a planned violent act, something that would shake the community to its core. The police warned that his escape was not just about freedom, but about revenge and destruction. Sarah's fears were validated. Jason was more dangerous than anyone had imagined. As the investigation closed in, Sarah faced her own personal reckoning. She had to confront the consequences of her choices and the role she played in unleashing a dangerous criminal on the loose. The affair that had started as a desperate attempt to fill an emotional void had spiraled into a nightmare with irreversible damage. Her story became a cautionary tale about trust, manipulation, and the dangers of hidden secrets. Sarah was determined to rebuild her life, but the scars of the past would remain. The shadow of Jason's escape hung over her like a storm cloud, a constant reminder of how far things had fallen. The community began to heal slowly, but the fear lingered. Jason was still out there, and no one knew when or if he would be caught. Sarah's life was forever changed, marked by the choices she made and the dangerous man she once believed in. The next chapter would reveal the shocking climax of this story, a final twist that would leave everyone stunned. The tension in the community had reached a breaking point as Jason remained on the run. Every day brought new fears and uncertainty, but Sarah was determined to face the consequences of her actions and try to protect her family from further harm. Despite the chaos surrounding her, she tried to find strength in the hope that the nightmare would soon end. The police were closing in, following leads and tracking Jason's movements. They knew he was dangerous, unpredictable, and desperate. His plan was no longer just about freedom. It was about revenge against those who had betrayed him, and that included Sarah. The warnings were clear. Anyone close to her could be in danger. Sarah's cooperation with law enforcement became crucial. She provided detailed information about Jason's contacts, his habits, and the places he might hide. Each piece of information brought the police closer to finding him, but it also put Sarah in greater danger. The threats intensified, and the fear that Jason's violent allies might strike grew stronger. One evening, as Sarah was preparing to leave her safe house for a court hearing, a sudden noise outside shattered the uneasy calm. She froze, heart pounding. The sound of footsteps, deliberate and slow, came closer to the door. Panic gripped her as she realized that someone had found her. She called the police immediately, but deep down she feared it was already too late. Minutes later, the door was kicked open. Two masked men stormed in. Sarah screamed but was quickly silenced. They bound her hands and blindfolded her, dragging her outside into a waiting vehicle. The world spun around her as she was taken away, terrified and helpless. This was the nightmare she had dreaded, the past catching up with her in the most violent way. Jason's allies had come to send a message. They were angry at Sarah's betrayal and wanted to punish her for cooperating with the police. The vehicle sped through dark streets, and Sarah could feel her life slipping away with every mile. Yet, amid the terror, she held onto a fragile hope that somehow she would survive. Hours later, Sarah found herself in an abandoned warehouse, a cold, empty space, lit only by a single flickering bulb. Jason was there, waiting for her. The man who had once seemed so distant and controlled now looked wild, dangerous, and full of rage. The calm, manipulative voice was gone, replaced by a furious and broken man. Jason accused Sarah of betrayal, blaming her for his capture and the danger he now faced. His words were harsh, but beneath the anger was a desperate need for control. He wanted her to know that he still held power over her, that the affair and her loyalty had cost her everything. But Sarah was no longer the frightened woman he had once manipulated. She faced Jason with a quiet strength born from months of fear, pain, and survival. She refused to be a victim any longer. Her confession of guilt was honest, but she made it clear that she would not be controlled or intimidated anymore. As the confrontation reached a climax, the sound of sirens filled the air. Police had tracked Jason's location through Sarah's earlier information and the tireless work of investigators. The warehouse was surrounded. Jason's allies tried to flee, but were quickly apprehended. The moment of truth had arrived. Jason realized that his plans had failed. Cornered and desperate, he made a final, desperate attempt to escape. In the chaos, a struggle broke out between him and the officers. It was violent and dangerous. Shots were fired. The community watched anxiously, waiting for the nightmare to end. In the final moments, Jason was subdued and arrested. He was taken away in handcuffs, his reign of terror finally over. The sense of relief was overwhelming but mixed with sadness. Lives had been changed forever, Sarah's most of all. The court case that followed was intense and public. Sarah testified about the affair, the manipulation, and the dangerous plans Jason had orchestrated. Her honesty helped bring justice but also exposed her to criticism and judgment. The community's sympathy was divided, but many recognized the courage it took to come forward. Jason was sentenced to a long prison term, this time with no chance of escape. The judge described him as a dangerous manipulator whose actions had caused pain and fear to many. For Sarah, the verdict was a bittersweet end to a dark chapter. The man she once loved was behind bars again, but the scars remained. Sarah worked hard to rebuild her life. She sought therapy to heal from the emotional wounds and worked to regain David's trust. It was not easy, and the road to recovery was slow. But step by step, she reclaimed her life, determined not to be defined by the mistakes of the past. The story of Sarah and Jason became a cautionary tale about the dangers of online relationships, especially with people who hide dark secrets. It was a reminder of how easily loneliness and vulnerability can be exploited. The online affair that began with hope and escape ended in betrayal, fear, and murder. Sarah's experience also highlighted the importance of support and courage in facing difficult truths. Her willingness to cooperate with law enforcement and speak out helped stop a dangerous criminal and prevented further harm. It was a difficult journey, but one that ultimately saved lives. The community slowly moved on, but the memory of those events lingered like a shadow. People remained cautious, aware that danger can hide behind the most unexpected faces. Sarah's story became part of the local history, a dark chapter that taught hard lessons. As for Sarah, she never forgot the man who had changed her life forever. The affair that had seemed like a desperate escape had become a haunting trap. But from the darkness, she found strength. She vowed never to let fear control her again. Her life was forever altered, but she was determined to find peace and hope in the future. The nightmare had ended, but the journey to healing was only just beginning.